If you take Highway 1 up the Central California coast, you're in for quite the scenic drive. Dr. Liana Forest moved here to a small town near San Luis Obispo named Los Osos after her research and practice in anthropology, psychology, and the fine arts took her and her family to the South Pacific, Africa, Mexico, and the San Luis Valley of Colorado. She recently wrote a teacher's manual for grades 3 through 8 called Crafting Creative Community. Students experience a year's curriculum of building community through cooperative learning and multiple intelligence, and recognizes the environment as a natural mentor. She has found most interesting the natural creative process of a community setting and how this is the best environment for children to learn.
Creativity is play and choice. Having the opportunity to play around with your environment, play around with whatever you encounter, and make your own choices about it. And there's gradual narrowing of choices. You bother the adults around you, or it doesn't fit within their mores and conventions, and so you are narrowed down into what you can do. And what I do with my expressive arts groups is expand the choices. And people say, oh wow, this is like kindergarten, you know, or preschool or pre-K. Even pre-K these days, they're narrowing the choices. They're teaching them to read, they're teaching them to do math a certain way, you know. They're not allowing them to play anymore. And I could see this happening. You see, that's why I stopped being an anthropologist. I could see this happening in these cultures that I was studying, where children had a pretty free life up until the point they went to school. Here was these little kids who were used to being at home, doing things with cousins, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, grandfathers, whoever was around. Suddenly they were all preschoolers, you know, they're all the same age. And then they were supposed to do certain things instead of just whatever occurred to them. And it was dreadful.
A new, improved way of teaching.
Trends have been in the other direction, really. Now we're having more testing. Now we're having more narrowing of choices. Now we're getting rid of the arts because they're non-essentials. One big movement in education has been multiple intelligences. So I use that in my book, that visual intelligence, that movement, which is kinesthetic intelligence and so forth, all those things that create the visual and the active arts and so forth are essential to learning. Mustn't get rid of them. We must integrate them into everything that you do. And it's hard to get people to realize the importance of that. Very hard to get teachers, because they're now focusing instead on satisfying politicians. When I think of creativity, I think of the way in which we inspire each other to do things differently, to go out on a limb, to try something a little different, to look at nature as basically creative, and what can we do, because we're part of nature. We are indistinguishable, really, from the biosphere, and therefore we're creative. Most people in their culture, like fish in water, they just don't notice it until someone else comes from somewhere else and says, oh, you're doing it this way, and then they notice it. But we can create our own culture. What I was going to show you is the book that I did for kids. It's called Crafting Creative Community. And what it does is take kids through a whole series of experiences of different levels of group interaction, so that they learn to consciously create together the kind of world they want to see. It starts off with the kind of group they want to have, what kind of team they want to have, how do they want to communicate to each other, what kind of signals do they want to give each other, just like the wolves. How do they want to exchange things like the bacteria? So the book takes the kids through a year of increasing consciousness of how they can create together, using all of the different curricula that the teacher has to teach them anyway, with the math and everything. And in the end, they have an environmental project that they do together. Yeah. I'm working with people, myself included, who are separate from the rest of this biosphere a lot of the time. We live in concrete. I mean, I remember what a struggle it was with some people who were asked to take off their shoes and walk on the earth. It was really hard for them. They really, and people do get in a very different space once they do Tai Chi with the bare feet on the earth, or on the edge of Haleakala crater at 5 a.m. in the morning. That's a creative experience. That's a transcendent or in-depth experience, you know, just by letting go and being part of your surroundings. So people have different ways of doing that, not always by art. Maybe going skiing.
Interesting. But is it possible to live your entire life in that state? I've heard the term peak experience. Our culture doesn't really want you to spend all your time there. It asks you to come out sometime.
I see. I'm not sure that people didn't once live in that state. I'm not sure that maybe it's our modern life that separates us from it. And I'm very familiar and happy with my modern life, and I want indoor plumbing, and I want this and that and the other. And so if I were a Bushman, or I were, you know, some other group that lived in a different way, not so separate from my surroundings, I might be in that state much more often. I hope that my life as I grow older will grow more and more that way.
What compels people to create?
Their being part of the biosphere, which is naturally creative. Yeah. And
so it's
what
not that
compels them not to create is what the question is. What keeps them from being creative? What keeps them from being creative is the illusion that they are totally separate and alone and they can't do anything unless there's something special about them, or someone says, oh my, what a creative child you are, or this is the way to do it and you'll be creative, you know. No, a child is naturally creative if it's not interfered with in that way. And what one needs to do is dispel those illusions and to move into that space that is naturally creative.